Hello, and welcome to this episode of The Insider, brought to you, as you jolly well know, by Vanishing Inc. My guest today changed the face of modern mentalism. It's Derren Brown. Derren, how are you this evening?
I'm very good, thank you. I've just changed my face.
Well, I like the one you've got.
I don't know what that means.
It's fine.
Nice to
Okay.
meet you. Thank you very much for having me on. A
Well,
pleasure.
thank you for doing it.
Is that a guitar and linking rings behind you?
Yes,
That's
it's a
good
thing I'm
combo.
working on where
So
I
you-
link
very
rings
niche
whilst.
act.
Yeah, it's very niche, but when you find your audience, it resonates so well.
Yeah.
What do you think people get wrong when it comes to mentalism?
Whoa, straight in. What do I think? Okay. I think it can be very indulgent.
Okay.
And I think part of the problem of that is there's this sort of slightly lazy thought that, oh, it's all about presentation, as if the rest of anything isn't, or that it should be any more or less about that. And I think that it can lend itself to a sort of this sort of the mentalist feeling he or she has a sort of aura about them, like they have a sort of a status that the audience is supposed to sort of buy into. And I think that's just sort of, it's just silly. It's really wrong, and it really misunderstands how any performer should be coming out in front of an audience. You know, you really have to earn any sort of status. You know, if you're going to pontificate about how clever you are, you really need to have just done something very clever in order to earn that, if it's a good idea ever. So the idea of, you know, just sort of coming out and imagining you already have sort of somehow earned it out of the air is just silly. So I think there is a lot of that, and there's a lot of it's the playing of status that's the problem. You know,
Right.
if you've genuinely, as a performer, have the status or want to have it, you should play against it anyway. I mean, as soon as you start playing any sort of high status role, I mean, it's gonna really just make you annoying. So I think all those problems that are already there, I think, with a lot of magic, are just sort of exacerbated by mentalism, which is so prone to pomposity.
Magic
And
squared
also,
equals mentalism.
yeah. And there's also, I think, because there's, again, it's sort of related to the same area that's all about presentation, but because there's often less going on in terms of props and stuff, that what's left really, perhaps more than magic, and this is what I think people are getting at when they talk about it's all presentation, is what's really key is the relationship between the mentalist and the audience, certainly, but particularly, which is something never really spoken about or thought about, something I write about a lot, is the relationship between the mentalist and the person on stage taking part, the participant. Like, those things suddenly become really key, because there isn't necessarily a visual trick. There's not rabbits appearing or disappearing, or there's not other stuff to look at. That sometimes you can get over the fact the magician's a bit unlikable, or maybe just sort of invisible. It's sort of, maybe it's just about the rabbits. With mentalism, often just the personality of the performer, and our personalities only really come out in relationship to somebody else. So therefore, the relationship with this other person on stage, all those things become so important. And I think that's it's a tricky thing to get right, you know, probably often wrong. Not saying I get it right, or that anyone's stupid for getting it wrong. I just think those things are really delicate issues, not very often spoken about, and precisely what this book I've written
It's
knows.
exactly what you do talk about in the book.
It's exactly what the book's about. Yeah.
It's like we'd arranged these questions. Is it flattering or annoying? And I've done my research, and it works out that it's 98% of mentalists performing today are clones of you. Is it flattering or annoying, or something else?
I don't even know if that's still the case. I think it was definitely maybe you know more than me. I at first it was a bit galling, because some of those tricks, like, you know, coin in hand or whatever, or the idea of, I don't know, getting to the end of the show and predicting you've done a prediction. There's a thing that you've been influencing people all along, and here's the big thing that you all fell into, and here's the proof that I knew. All those things that I guess are sort of tropes that got started. Those took a lot of thinking about and like hard work and months of particularly I remember the like the coin in hand thing. I remember us really puzzling over, and I think it was for Mind Control too, the idea of something that would just feel like a game that had always been around. Something you played as a kid, but not. I mean,
like rock, paper, scissors, or something.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's really difficult. I think it was Richard McDougall who was part of the creative team for that show that came up with it as an idea. I think it was him that provided the thing. So there was just a lot of work and a lot of thought and head scratching, and then within 6 months, it's in the magic shops as this old thing, the classic of mentalism that's been around forever. And it's which is sort of ironic because that's what we were aiming for.
Pretending to be, yeah.
Yeah. So it was galling at the beginning, and it was sort of odd, and then I thought, well, this is either going to annoy me for a long time, or I need to find a strategy to not be annoyed by it. So I decided to make friends as much as I could with. I've got my squeaky chair. If you're picking up on that,
fix it in post.
Thank you. To make friends with as many of the annoying mentalists as I could, and it worked because then I didn't find it annoying if I liked the person. So that went on for so long, and then there were perhaps too many. And now I don't really think. I don't know if it's in my mind. It's not still the case. I sort of find myself a bit irrelevant now as far as the magic community goes. I imagine everyone's moved on, and as far as who you're going to emulate, I think I sort of feel that moment for me is past anyway. And if as in there are other models around, I imagine now. I do see it a lot. I see just lines from my show and gags and stuff, and just things that are a bit more ephemeral being used, and I guess it's just part of the course, and just sort of what happens, and you do have a choice whether you're going to be bugged by it and try and stop it, which is so silly and impossible, or just sort of be kind of flattered by it and then just not think about it. I don't see a lot of mentalism. I don't see a lot of mentalists perform, partly because of that. Perhaps the worry that it would bug me. I also think part of the problem is there's not, in magic, there's so many different types of magicians around that if you're starting out and you're looking for a role model, even not necessarily consciously, but just seeing someone that you really like.
How am I going to start? Yeah.
Yeah, there's like 50 different styles of doing magic, it seems. Whereas with mentalism, it just seems a lot more limited. So the chances are you're going to hone in on one of 4 ways of doing it. And I remember when I started, mentalism was a very niche thing. It felt to me like there were about 4 mentalists in the world that were doing it. I'm sure there were more, but in my mind I could think of me, and there was Graham Jolly and Ian Nolan. I got to know
Mark Paul,
and obviously there were more, but in terms of it was
working.
It was niche, yeah. And that's a shame because there should be as many ways of doing it as there are people. I remember seeing, as there are performers. I remember seeing Stephen Long do his show in Edinburgh, and but it was fairly early on in my career, so there were definitely a lot of people that were sort of doing it in that mould, whatever that is, and it was sort of wonderful, his show, because it just there was nothing, there was no sense of me. And it was totally him. And I don't know if you know Stephen Long, but he's a very distinct character and just one of the best human beings.
Listeners or readers may be more familiar with his work as Hector Chadwick. But he is a magnificent human being, and the show totally encapsulated him. And it should be like that, shouldn't it? I remember seeing a 15-year-old guy at the Magic Circle once come out, and he was introduced as, this next kid's only 15, and he came out and did his act like a little miniature corporate adult. And it was such a shame. I thought, oh, no, if you're 15, be 15. Yeah. Like, that's interesting. There's stuff to bring to it. So it'd be lovely if we could all do that, if we could all sort of bring our stuff. It's so hard. It is so hard. And, of course, part of the creative process is to copy and to
and that's part of the. You don't want to always copy. You need to find your way through and out of it. But it is absolutely part of how you grow as any sort of
Yeah, I
performer
don't think
or
it's an
artist, whatever.
awful. I don't think it's
No,
an awful thing to start off.
you have to. You just have to. So you have to take it with a pinch of salt when people say it's just bad to copy. But there comes a point when once you know you should move on and you don't, that's not good. Or if you're using people's lines and so on, I mean that isn't obviously that's not good. And if you're something I see a lot is if you're specifically making changes to your act so it isn't like somebody else, then you're too close. The ship sailed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I always have the image that stayed with me when I was starting off as a magician, and I went to there was a popular act that used to appear a lot in magic gala shows where people would make records of vinyl appear. It was like a classic manip act, right? And there was a moment when it changed to people producing CDs, and there was one act, and forgive me, anyone, if you're listening to this and it was you, but I just remember seeing there was a big fuss around how magic had been modernised, and it was now CDs rather than. And I was there even as a newbie in magic, thinking, hang on, isn't it just the same? It's the same thing. You're just producing a different object. So I think there's a lot of that. My mind goes back to that a lot. It's just CDs instead of vinyl.
Sometimes doing the same thing with a different object can be quite good, though. So the who was it? Delgadio? Someone weird did the piano trick from Royal Road with the pairs of cards in the fingers.
Oh yeah,
with socks. And it.
Oh, it was Stephen Long.
Oh, was it Stephen Long?
Well, hang on. No, he did one trick with socks. May not have been Stephen. I think David Williamson also did a thing with socks, didn't he?
Anyway, so my point was that doing the same thing with a different object can sometimes be good.
Very true. But cards to socks is a bigger change than vinyl to CDs.
Yes, I can't argue with that. How did you meet that there Andy Nyman, and how did that collaboration influence your approach and your work?
Oh, good question. So I can't remember the moment of meeting Andy. I suspect it was at a magic convention and we would have chatted. I was very self-absorbed in my early days at magic conventions, so I may not have noticed anybody I met. And then
just crushed velvet and gorgeousness.
Just crushed velvet and sort of broken ego. And then but then what sort of happened next, and what started off this kind of relationship that we have, was that Andrew O'Connor and Michael Vine, who ran Objective Productions, I'm sure this is a story you've heard before, but they were looking for someone that would do this, and because there were not many people doing mentalism, it was hard to find somebody. But they had gone to Andy. Andy had turned it down because, although he would have been phenomenal in that role, he really wanted to focus on acting, and quite rightly, he thought it would just get in the way. But he offered himself as a consultant. So then they found me, and they liked me, and they signed me up. This is back in 1999 or something, just before the first Mind Control special. Andy came in as a consultant, and I think he was massively influential for me, because I had my way of doing it, and luckily that company, Objective Productions, was a small production company specializing in magic shows. Andrew was a magician, Michael was a magician. They all lived and breathed magic, so they got that. They saw whatever it was in me and nurtured that, as opposed to what I think has happened a lot since, is this is popular, this type of magic's popular on TV, so we need to create somebody else that does that. Mm-hmm. Having said that, I'm sure I was an answer to David Blaine or whatever that was happening at the time. So, it was a lot of it was out on the street and so on. So there was clearly a bit of that going on. But generally speaking, in terms of how I was within that group, it was very much, we like this guy, and how do we bring that to the fore? So, naturally, I had a lot of terrible, indulgent habits, and Andy and I were very different. We're different performers, and I think what he really instilled in me, and particularly on stage, was performance energy and things that I didn't really know much about. And I think when I look back at the early performances, I can see a lot of Andy in there. Andy's performance very much on his front, the balls of his feet.
Sure.
And that's on your balls. It's quite a sort of theatrical thing of just literally kind of leaning forward. And he's like, when you watch Andy perform, he's like a prize fighter. That's his sort of thing. And I imagine that Fogel had a similar feel about him. So when I look back at those early shows, sorry, pneumonia. I see myself as more. There's a lot of that in the air, and I think over the years I've found myself more as a performer, and I can see myself literally sort of relaxing a little more. So I find it a bit sometimes oddly high energy, like I talk quite quickly and so on. But I think Andy. And Andrew and the team is really
obviously the team is more than just Mr. Nyman.
Yeah, hugely formative, and I suspect on stage more than anything, because that's where you're shaped as a performer. Whereas TV, a lot of it is the edit is what makes the atmosphere of the show.
Yeah. Now, my uncle taught me magic, and he says that
Are you about to go into a trick?
No.
No, okay.
My dead grandfather picked this card.
There it is.
He says that a good, unusual, surprising reveal is way more important than a method. Do you think he's right?
Of course. Yeah, of course.
So why does everyone obsess with method?
Because that's the delicious stuff that is so satisfying as a performer, and 90% of magic isn't ever really performed for real world people. It's just stuff you do for your friends and for your own pleasure. So
yeah.
But for me, I think a satisfying method, like I think it was Richard Dawkins in The God Delusion saying that evolution is a very good theory because it's a simple thing, survival of the fittest, that explains so much, everything, all of life. And creation is a bad theory because the thing, God did it, begs so many other questions that it's sort of weirdly a bit top heavy. But what you want is a simple idea that creates the biggest effect. And so for me, a satisfying magic method is about that. And I always prioritize that. I like to sort of enjoy, enjoy the doing of it and that side of it. So it isn't for me about anything complicated at all. I think my methods, as far as the shows go, are I like a sort of big and soft and just sort of no one really minds. That's my sort of weird picture of, as opposed to furtive or elaborate or whatever. I just sort of I like the idea that it's just all of things here and there, and they create the biggest effect, and time and time is a lovely again, it's something I write about in the book, but it's so sort of underused, and people don't think of time as a method, as in you drop something in earlier on and then later on you pick up on it, and there's the satisfaction of sort of, this is a thing from earlier on, but you've also forgotten, and the story has been reframed, and it's a hugely powerful tool.
Of course.
And it's not normally within the sort of traditional list of magicians' methods. There's so many things I think are just deliciously soft but really powerful. So I love a good method, but probably my sense of what to me is a good method may not be anybody else's idea of satisfying.
Well, in Sachs' Sleight of Hand, he says that patter should be like piano accompaniment to a singer. It should be subservient and not dominate. Do you agree with Sachs?
Oh, no, I don't. No, I don't. I remember David Copperfield came to see the show when I was doing Broadway. The first time I met him, he was incredibly charming and lovely. And he sort of, he made a sweet, very good-natured remark that there was an awful lot of talking in the show, which I suppose makes sense. No, I think, not for me. For me, even the very idea of patter, it's like when we talk about participants being, when we talk about
spectators.
Spectators being like, it's just this sort of weirdly peripheral role. They're just watching you being clever. And likewise, the idea of patter just being this sort of fill-in. I don't think that model doesn't work for mentalism. It might work for a lot of magic, but it's all in the words, isn't it? And you're creating a story, and that's how I see it. My kind of toolkit is the sort of story that people are telling themselves in the audience.
Yeah.
So it's all words and timing and all the other things. It's so no, I think to me it's absolutely dead central.
Do you get nervous before shows still? And if you do, how do you deal with it?
I don't really get nervous. What I find is for the first week or so, we're changing the show like every night so much because the audience tell you what's wrong with the show, right? They start coughing when they're not interested, or they don't laugh as much as you thought at this bit, or they're shuffling around, whatever. They tell you. So that means for the first week, that audience first arrive, we're like, okay, big changes. So every night I'm going out and having to do a different one-man show, more or less. There's probably a good third of the show will be very different every night. So I kind of have a sort of I don't quite know how to describe it. It's not really nerves, but it's a very focused thing whereby all the kind of the guys that are setting the props and I'm slightly kind of a little bit like getting when you trumpet a cat in a bath, a bit of me is like that.
Yeah.
But over the years, I've learnt, and this is something that my manager said to me, Michael Vine said to me one night, really early on. In fact, I think it was the very first show I ever did. He just put his head around the door and said, "Enjoy it," and that is it's such a simple thing, but it stayed with me, and I always make sure. And you have to do it quite consciously sometimes. When writing a routine, how is this going to be enjoyable for me to do? Because there are some routines that are just boring to do, or you just don't like yourself in that role doing it. So how do I enjoy it? But also, if a show is sort of feeling a bit stressy because there have been so many changes, how am I going to go out and really love this experience? And that's not just about yourself. It's like that's integral to the show being a good show. If you're not enjoying it, no one else is going to. So I've learnt ways of nipping that in the bud and going, things have gone wrong. Everything that can go wrong has gone wrong. I've gone wrong, failed so many times in so many different ways, and it just doesn't matter that much, really, because overall the show will be good, and so I've learned to not sweat it too much. So no, I don't get that nervous. I'm very comfortable on stage. I think the times I do get nervous are if I'm doing something like a chat show and I'm waiting around for your name to be called, because there's nothing you can do. You're just in the wings waiting for. I hate that. I think that's a very common experience. I think that's sort of quite a normal thing, but no, not in terms of doing the show.
I don't think you do agree to do this, but if you were at a restaurant or a party or people around your house and someone asked you to show them something, how do you respond? Because I don't think you do show people things. So how do you get out of it?
I don't. I don't do it in real life at all.
But you must be asked to do stuff all the time. So how do you politely decline?
No, I'm not. No, it's a weird thing. I'm not. I don't remember. The last time I can remember was probably 15 years ago. And I was at a table in a restaurant, and a guy came over from quite a big table of corporate-y looking blokes, and he came over and said, "Oh, it's Derren Brown, isn't it? And you come over and just show some stuff to the guys here." And I really loved it. I'm literally, eating. Really love to see something. And I said, I mean, just kind of rude. And I sort of said, "Oh, thanks. If it's all right, it's my night off." And then he went back and went, "Oh, it's his night off," and they all sort of laughed. That stuck in my mind. I think that was the last time. So I just don't. But whatever however, I don't know how it is that I've positioned myself in people's consciousness, but people don't ask. Um, uh, and I think if somebody did, I mean, I've really got. There are a couple of things, if push comes to shove, over the years that I've loved, but I've always had this rule that I could not bring myself to carry any props with me or anything like that. So if I was ever going to have anything, it would just have to be something I could do completely impromptu. In fact, one of the things I write about, there's a few tricks in the book, and one of them was my version of what you could do with the ring flight. Because that was a prop I always used to carry because it was what I carried my keys on, and I just ended up I bought myself a really nice little leather key pouch, so I liked it, and I thought, well, I've got this, but it doesn't. It could. How on earth do you make that a mentalist trick? So after a lot of sitting and thinking and chatting, I sort of came up with something which is in the book, but I don't very often really do that because I don't get myself into that position. If it felt like I was at a table and it just felt like, oh, this would actually go down really well and people would appreciate it and maybe I will, then I might do. But I don't, because it's such a shift in mood and attention and whatever my personality or role has been in that group until that point is about to drastically change if I do that. So I just don't. And then it's been so long since I've done anything sort of close up that I then start to feel a bit like I've lost the muscle for it, which is a shame. And then I go through periods of thinking I'd love to rediscover it. I'd love to sort of get back into it, and then I just sort of don't. But yeah, I have a couple of things, but I just generally I haven't been asked for so long, and I don't actually have a nice get out. If I was asked, I'd have to mumble something about it being my day off again, and then I'd just feel awful. I mean, I've remembered that guy for 15 years,
Sure.
so it would always.
And he
bug
probably
me.
still slags you off.
Yeah, he probably is right now as we speak. It's probably his number one story.
His only story. Now, as you've just got on about that you kind of fell out of love with card magic. But I'm just curious if you can remember what the last magic trick or magic book you bought was.
I haven't fallen out of love with card magic. A good card trick is still wonderful. It still gets me, but I just find I'm lost. I'm out of the game so soon with most magic, and I realise at the moment it's about the magician. And this is just because I've been overexposed to it. It's not because this is bad magic on anyone else's part. But the moment it's sort of, okay, pick a card, and look, I'm going to put it. I'm lost. It's one of the reasons why I really like the card at any number sort of plot, or the idea of it, and why it's the only card trick I sort of stuck with since kind of just realising I sort of moved away from it. Because the premise of that begins with you, the participant, whatever, you making decisions and being asked questions about what you, and that's it. It sounds a little thing, but it's actually, I think, I noticed that if I was seeing a trick where I was being asked what my favourite card was or what I thought, that totally changed my relationship to it, and suddenly I was much more likely to be involved. So I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. If that appeals to me, that's something, if I'm ever going to do any card magic, I should make sure is the case. But the last book I got was the posthumous Eugene Berger volume, which I haven't read through. I started it and was really loving it, and then I moved house and it all got put in storage and I haven't gone back to it. But I was really enjoying that.
Oh, that's fairly recent. I thought it would have been ages ago.
Well, before that, it was David Berglass's The Berglass Effect.
Oh, right, okay, that's quite a big gap.
yeah, and then before that, I mean, I
couldn't
tell you. Tarbell, I have no idea. Yeah.
Now, it's funny you mentioned that card at any number, but that you've chastised, or maybe a strong word, magicians for doing card magic and making it all about them. And I heard you in an interview say that you're, as the spectator, just a warm prop, which was a delightful turn of phrase.
Which I don't think is mine, by the way. I'm sure.
Oh, okay. Well, either way.
I've heard that from someone else.
Okay, well, we'll get the
yeah.
crediting. Tom Mulliker, maybe. Let's say it's him.
Yeah.
What can people do to stop making it about them?
Well, to me, that's just sort of it's everything, and it's the big question. I think your magic cannot be it can't be anything other than transformed when it when it stops being about you. It cannot be a magical experience for the person taking part if it's just about you, the performer. And it's I think it's a really fine line, but also my sensitivity to it isn't going to be the same. I've watched magicians that I think, oh, that was all a bit self-aggrandizing, but the person I've been with who isn't a magician has just absolutely loved it. So I don't think my opinion really counts for much. It's only my taste.
Of course.
But it's just, for me, the starting point. In fact, there's a chapter in the book about effects. I'll give you an example because it's just a thing in the book. And it was the thing with the ring flight. So there's I was thinking, I got into thinking about magic tricks where you wouldn't be around for the climax.
Right.
And it's partly because I always found it a bit awkward. How do you soak up the kind of, like, you just want to give people an experience, and somehow it was, perhaps a bit awkward, or could be killed by people feeling they had to go. Oh, yeah, it was very
Yeah.
So the idea of you, somebody stops you and says, "Oh, can you show me a trick?" And this was a thing I could do in people in the street, and I would say, "Oh, we've met before. We've had this conversation before. Do you remember?" And they'd say, "No, sorry, no, we were in Timpson's. You were getting your front door key card. Do you remember?" And we spoke and we said we'd meet. Do you not remember any of this? No. Show me your front door key. So they'd get their front door key out, and then the effect would be I'd take it and I'd throw it off the bridge we were on, or drop it down a manhole cover, and just get rid of it. I wouldn't vanish it. I would just get rid of their key. It's gone. And I said, "Do you not remember any of this when we met before?" "No." "Okay. You got your key card, and I got you to make an extra key for me, and I said we would meet again here. It was like 6 years ago or something." And then I go out and I fish out, go through my keys. There you go. What's your address again? They tell me their address, and I'm going through the keys. That one, I think it looks very similar to yours. It's not quite the same. It hasn't got the owl on the front like yours has, but that should open your front door. Anyway, nice to see you again, and we'll do this again. I think it's in 3 years, and it'll be back at the same spot, and you won't remember again. But anyway, I'll see you in 3 years. Bye. And I go, and then they've got the whole journey home with this key, going, "Hello, Derren Brown, on my front door." And then that lovely moment when they put it, hopefully, in their lock, and it opens their front door. And anyway, but to me, that's like that's not about me. Then it's sort of about me, I suppose, but it's not really. It's about their weird experience of going up to the door. So that's I think you have to get over so much. Oh, hang on a minute. I'm getting a weird. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I can't hear you. Hang on a second. Let me just. Got Siri being a dick. Oh, you're back. Siri's gone. You're back.
There we go.
So yes. So yeah. It's sort of about me in a way. But it really is about that. That experience for them of approaching the front door or whatever. I think there's the whole fun of it and the challenge of it for me is, how can this experience be more than just me showing off? And that's not saying anything about other magicians. There's plenty of great, wonderful, fun, brilliant, creative magic that is sort of about the magician showing off. It doesn't matter because it's just wonderful. It's just personal taste, but
Of course.
because I do so little of it, but now really in terms of close up. But there was a thing when I was on tour doing Showman, and I was seeing we had Andy Frost and Bradley Hodgins, Alex Hansford on tour with this wasted moving bits of props around on stage, but they would sit around and just show each other magic, and so it got me thinking about what I'd like to do. So I kind of, what a new close-up thing would be, and I was kind of imagining a trick where someone would sit and there'd be a cup and a little ball of paper or an object, maybe it's something I could do in a cafe. We'd hold hands and we'd close our eyes. When they'd open their eyes, the little, the ball of paper would be on top of the cup or it would be under the cup, and we'd close our eyes, do it again, and maybe the cup's invert, just something that would be completely about this weird experience for the person. There are ways of doing it that aren't just look at my skills. There can be. I don't think it's that difficult, and I think it's a much more interesting project and hard. But of course, it should be hard.
Yeah.
Magic's it's sort of easy, really. And I think setting these challenges for ourselves that make it more difficult. I mean, you're going to just disregard 90% of good ideas because they don't quite hit this sweet spot that you're after. I think that should be a part of any good creative process.
Completely agree. But that's it, isn't it? Going through all of the methods for a certain plot and disregarding the things that don't resonate with you is something that everybody should do when they're trying to learn a new trick. Your new book, Notes from a Fellow Traveller, which you have alluded to earlier a couple of times, which is
subtly though. You
very, very subtly. I've just gone straight in with the plug segment.
Thank you.
No, you're very welcome. For me, a bit of the takeaway, or the main takeaway I had, it's not really, because yes, there's a couple of tricks, but people may think, well, if tricks aren't explained, then it's a theory book, because that's your options with magic. Really, there's tricks or there's theory, but it's not a theory book at all. For me, in any traditional sense,
it's a performance book.
Yeah.
Really, I just thought there's this whole wodge of stuff that is so important about performing, and also not just performing, but writing and how you get a show together, and that's massively important. And it doesn't matter if you're it's not about doing a big show for a few thousand people. It's also, you might be thinking about doing a little show above a pub, or not, or just doing close-up, or it really doesn't matter. But there's so much to be said that just isn't said normally, isn't written about, isn't thought about. And for me, it's the stuff that I live and breathe, really. I don't, it's the stuff that provides all the joy and fun and makes it the best job in the world for me. So yeah, that's what I wanted to impart. So you're right, it's not a theory book and it's not really a book of tricks, although there are some. I wanted to put some tricks in there just so people couldn't say, oh no, there aren't any tricks. I didn't want that to be a thing. So no, there are some
angry people on the Magic Cafe. You clearly think a lot about the why for a trick, why you have that power, why you're showing them, why the thing works, like getting slapped in the face doing the speed counting thing, etc., etc., etc. Is there a process you use for finding that why?
Yes, I ask.
Will you tell us what it is?
I ask why.
That is so insightful, Derren.
It is.
And that's why you're the man that you are today. Thanks very much. Bye.
But no, it is as simple as that. And I think the why question is at every level of why is this trick in the show? Well, first of all, when we start writing a show, which we are about to do, I don't know when this podcast will go out, but we're currently beginning to get our heads around this a new show called Only Human, which will be touring in 2025. Haven't written a word of it yet, and people are buying tickets already, which is a bit odd, but I kind of got used to that. Yeah, I'm
going to come see it in Brighton.
Thank you. No idea what you're going to say. Could be anything. But the first question is why why are we doing the show? Like, what's the beating heart of the show? What is the reason for staging another show? And that isn't about making money, or it's about what I mean by that is what's the thing that people are taking away? How are people a little bit different or changed, or what's the thing you go away with at the end?
Yeah.
So that's like a really big, that's the broadest question. That's a kind of a why question. And then for each trick we'll come up with, some tricks that are born straight out of that why theme, and some tricks will just be, wouldn't it be great to do like psychometry and Sherman? Like, we haven't done psychometry, so then it's like, well, why are we doing psychometry? So how does that? And if it doesn't fit the why, if it doesn't really have a place, then it goes. Doesn't matter how great it is. But hopefully we can make it at that level. You can normally make a trick fit. But then once you're into the trick, then it's, why am I saying this? Why are we doing this? Why? And then, why am I taking this object? Why am I, right down to those sort of very actory things of
what's my motivation?
Why am I turning to, yeah, no, absolutely. But all those things are what make a show make sense, and they're it's such an important question, because without it, a show would be a series of tricks, and without it, the tricks wouldn't make any sense. It would be difficult to follow, and so you can't avoid the question. But I think the more you ask it, the more cohesion you get within a show, and the more, if you're hiding methods within a performance, which of course you are, then that really, you have to ask that. You can't, if you've got to go over and do something over here to hide a method, and there's no other way of doing it, you need a really good, clear answer to the why, as to why you're walking over there and doing that, right? It can't just be a thing you sort of add on. It needs to be utterly motivated. And I just think those things are so important, and not always obvious. And I remember it was infamous, and we had the show was infamous, and we had a big set change, and it was actually 52 seats came forward. Like, there were these, it was like almost a studio audience looking setup would come forward at the end of Act 1, and it was going to be a setup for a card at any number effect in the second half. So 52 people would come up and sit on the chairs, and then we ditched the trick because there were too many card tricks, it felt like, in the second half, which was only 3, whatever. It was too many. So we had to, but we had these seats which we had to use, because it was, we spent a lot of money on them. We had to use the seats for something. So that was a why. Well, we're doing this trick because we need to fill these seats, but
spent the money on them.
Yeah, but it then became, we sort of had to, as often happens, have to come up with a new trick during the day and then do it in the evening. And I looked at them and thought, well, okay, forget the fact there are 52 for a minute. Hopefully no one's counting. It does look like a studio audience, so maybe we could do mediumship. Because that was around the time that those sorts of shows were quite popular on TV, and John Edwards and people would do their horrible brand of TV studio mediumship. So then it became getting people up and giving a mediumship reading. But why? Like, why would I be doing mediumship in the middle of this show? And that didn't quite make sense, but we sort of didn't have much choice because we had to think of something. And it was a relatively, technically quite an easy thing to put together. So we did. And then this sort of, the routine became about a kind of telling people I was lying to them as I was doing it, and saying, I'm getting a message from your Auntie Jill. Is that her name? Yes. And I'm not really, obviously I'm just making this up, but she's saying to me, and she's not saying anything, I'm lying to you, but she's saying that you've just painted your bedroom blue. Yes, but this strange, like, I'm lying to you, but then telling you stuff that I couldn't possibly know. And it created this really interesting sort of feel to the whole routine that was, again, why those disclaimery type questions of, are you saying it's real or not? They're not the point. The point is what theatrical space you create by what you're doing. And this third space of he's saying it's fake, but it was really interesting. So that sort of ended up in a less than obvious way becoming a sort of a why. It sort of found its reason for being in the show, because it just created this really interesting, weird sort of tension, which was great. So sometimes it's not necessarily obvious, and sometimes you find it by doing it after a few nights, and then you find the reason why it exists and why you love it, and then you lean into that a bit more, and then you let that settle and become properly the heart of it.
In the book, you mentioned about the endings of your shows and it being a story and finding an emotional message you want them to leave the theatre with. How do you begin to think about what that emotional message is? Because I've heard you talk that you have to come up with the name of the show very far in advance, and then you think, oh shit, what are we going to do now? So how do you go from name of show to feeling?
There's not an easy answer to that, but over the years, the fact there isn't an easy answer is normally the key to what makes something work. That it's a difficult thing to get right, because it means you're always starting from scratch every time with the important stuff, which is important. So we do have to come up with a poster, and the moment we're like, let's do a show next year, we will need a poster for the brochures that are going to advertise a year ahead and all that. So we have to come up with a title and an image, without a sense of what the show is. But weirdly, it then gives you a sort of begins to give you a sort of a framework. Like, oh, that's what the show looks like now. That's the poster. That's what people are expecting. So okay, all right. So that it gives you a starting point, bizarrely. So that's how that bit works. And then it is the first question. And I think what we're sort of doing, so with this show at the moment, so we haven't had a single writing meeting for it, but there's been a couple of very loose conversations. And what I've sort of brought to the table to kind of kick things off, because ultimately it's going to be up to me to go, I think the show should be about this, and because I've got to do it every night, so sure. I want it to be about something I care about. So I've gone, here's a theme I think is wonderful and interesting and we haven't touched on yet. So I've sort of gone there. And then here's a couple of other, here's a thing that also I think is interesting, which wouldn't be the main theme of the show because it doesn't have an emotional heart, but it's kind of like an interesting head thing, which again, I haven't really touched on, and I find it interesting. So that's that. And I'm quite looking forward to doing a lot of reading around it and just sort of throwing myself into that a bit more. So I think that could be a thread, and maybe that, and then this other thing, this more emotional heart, will find a way of coming together. And then also I think finding another sort of big, this is more like the not so much would be the message of the show, but the kind of, at a very experiential level, what sort of thing people are watching. Because, this is like 11 shows in now, and you want to surprise people, and you want to over-deliver every time, and have people coming away going, oh my God, I wasn't expecting that, and, so we're sort of also thinking about, we haven't done, and it's not about tricks. It's not
like the second half of what's it being the Q&A act. Like that was quite a surprise.
That's like a big broad blah thing. Yeah. Or in Showman, at the end you realise, the whole thing's, it's like he didn't get to have a funeral for his dad, which obviously my dad's still alive. That was just for the show, but that's not true. But so actually you get to the end and you realise, but that's what the show, that's the big broad, but it's nothing to do with the trick. It's just, Dad didn't have a funeral, and actually the show bizarrely has become a tribute to him and a sort of replacement for the funeral and so on. So I'm finding what those big, just broad, this is what the show is going to be about, which is slightly different from the kind of messages of it as well. Anyway, so we start to talk about those things, and sometimes The hardest one was Secret, which was the one on Broadway, but it kind of went under the name Underground here because, which was a best of, like a best
Yeah, I
of
saw the
Derren Brown show.
preview in London before you went to
That's
America
right.
with
So
it.
we knew in America we should, well, just take the best bits from all the shows and put together the best possible Derren Brown show. But to do that here and sort of essentially really run it in and have it find its feet, it had to be it had to be a best of show. And it was interesting because putting a show together like that, there was no heart to it. That was because the starting point wasn't let's make this show about Dad dying or let's make this show about whatever. It was just the best bits, and then we were actually the show was starting off Broadway on stage, and it was sort of I think really the only theme here is "Look at me, aren't I clever," which I always think is such a shame to have at its heart. And then it occurred to me, sort of. I think it was like a good couple of weeks in. I might be misremembering the timing, but it definitely felt like it was up and running. And I remember thinking, oh, I realise now what the show's about. It's about the fact that magic shows us that our experience of the world doesn't match up to reality. If you see a trick and you're fooled by it, you realise, what I thought was real isn't. Like, there's more going on that I've missed. And actually, that's a really valuable thing to realize about life, So, and up until then, I think the only interesting thoughts about magic was that maybe it transports us back to a state of wonder, or there was like a limited number of things to sort of take because we want to make this childish thing feel important, right? But it sort of hit me, and then it's like maybe that is what the show's about, and then you can start to bring that theme in and place a bit of it here and a bit of it there and a bit of it here and introduce objects and that can create that feeling very subtly, so people go away with a sense of the whole show was about this thing. And weirdly it wasn't. It was a thought that occurred 2 weeks in, and you put it in retrospectively. So there's and again, it's all stuff I write about. I think it's actually really interesting and important because you want to make your show emotionally impactful, but you don't want to beat people over the head with something or outstay your welcome in terms of sounding a bit preachy or whatever. So all these things are important, but they're always difficult to get right. There's no easy template. There are some things that we've sort of found a bit of a template for, but then we will purposefully break with it so that other people don't find it too familiar. But that stuff, the kind of big stuff, it just it isn't, other than I hope the stuff I've thought about or written about, whatever, just during the year or two in between will provide me with a theme that will be interesting and remain interesting enough to me, at least for the next year of touring.
Now, most people that come to vanishinginkmagic.com do not do big touring shows. They might.
What?
I know. We have to. I know. I'm
lazy,
sorry. I know.
Lazy.
I don't mean to disappoint you. And I imagine that, in fact, a lot of them don't do shows. So, what's in the book for them?
I wanted to write it for, although it's principally for people that are maybe putting together a show of any size, as I said, like 12 people in a room, or a bigger shows, because it just struck me that more and more people are doing that now. It was unusual when I started doing magic in theatres, other than maybe sort of Paul Daniels and veteran people historically. It was sort of an unusual thing, and now you go to Edinburgh and it's all magicians. So it's a common thing nowadays. So I wanted to write this book principally for those people that are thinking about doing that sort of thing. But it's also a book for any magician that just wants to think about the performance side of stuff and the richness of that and how to perform better. And I think it applies across the board. And I've had a lot of people that aren't magicians but are actors or performers in other areas that have also taken a lot from it. And a big portion of the book also is just a journal of touring and the real life experience of what that is, and stuff going horribly wrong and weird, I remember one woman getting her head stuck to the table in the interval up in the bar because she hadn't been on stage, but she just responded to some hypnotic thing that was kind of in the air in the first half, and I had to deal with that, and I couldn't. And then I'm doing the second half of the show, thinking there's a woman upstairs with her head stuck to the table, and I have to go and see her after. So just there's just a lot of it is just simply that sort of the reality of touring. But really, for me, it's just lessons. It's lessons learned. It's all about mistakes I'm making, things I've learned over the years, and I think whatever you're doing in magic, at whatever sort of level, it's certainly not a book I expect people to read if they're doing shows for thousands of people. I think it's helpful if you are, but probably by that point, you've thought about a lot of these things. So anybody performing, or even if you're not really performing, but you just think it's important to get this kind of stuff right. And I don't think there's an awful lot written about this particular important aspect of it.
I don't think there is. As we're on the subject of books, what are some books that you would consider essential reading for anyone who is or wants to perform magic or mentalism?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I don't know. I really don't know. There are the classics, Animan and 13 Steps, but they were the classics for me, and they were like essentials for people of my age. When I was starting in magic, which was 1930, whenever that was. But it's really hard to say nowadays. I mean, I think
there isn't a 13 Steps or Corinda. They haven't been updated for.
There's a wonderful book called Notes from a Fellow Traveller by
yes, I've heard
Derren
it.
Brown.
I love that Derren Brown. He's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, I hate to sound like a man of a certain age, but there is a lot to be said for going back to those. I realize exactly how this sounds, but going back to those old ideas, particularly with mentalism, because it's become everything is such a shortcut. All this electronic stuff, which is really clever and exciting. And if I was doing the odd close-up gig, I might even be tempted to use it. But is a total non-starter if you're a professional performer every night, because you want to be responsible for your miracles. You don't want something that could fail and leave you you're just stuck. And if you've got a backup method in the air, then just use the backup method. Yeah. The joy of those old-fashioned things is that if you strip away the aura around them, that they really work. There's a reason why they stuck around. I was really reluctant to do the Q&A, to do that Oracle Act. I think it was Andrew O'Connor that suggested it, because it was literally, here's a big mentalism thing we haven't done. And at that point, no one was doing Q. Well, again, historically, of course, people were doing it. I mean, no one was doing it, but it wasn't.
It wasn't hot.
No, it was just a niche thing that you were just aware that some sort of vaguely old-fashioned performers did and still did. And it just felt a bit like an old man's thing. And it was magnificent to do. I don't mean to watch, but to do and to realize the power of it. And it was just such a joy. And you kind of go, oh, I see why this had so much power in its day and still has. So, and that's about an effect. It's not about a clever method.
No, it's the plot.
It really is. So there's a lot in them there books.
Books.
But yeah, I honestly don't know. I mean, do people even read books nowadays?
I'll take old books as a good answer.
Yeah.
Your scallop and whatever it was, burgers are calling. So I realise we're getting close to that. Now we always end the show. We always end the show with 4 quickfire questions, and to change things up, before I ask the questions, we're going to play a game called "How Well Do You Know Andy Nyman?" So, because I asked him the same 4 questions. So I'll ask you.
He obviously knows himself very well, so that would.
No, but it only works for you. It wouldn't work for him.
Oh. Okay.
So I'll ask you the question. You answer it in Derren's voice, and then you have to guess what Mr. Nyman answered. Okay?
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, great. Okay, got it. Okay.
Favourite pizza topping?
I think he'd start with the margarita, and he would add. You see, he's not going to like. You're not going to like any. He likes a pickle. That man likes a pickle. Doesn't like seafood. Um, doesn't like. Do you know what? I think I might just go a classic margarita.
Mhm.
Maybe basil, perhaps a bit of burrata, something like that. And he'd be making it himself on his in his pizza oven.
Very good. Very good indeed.
Was that correct?
Yeah, that way
Again,
he said if he's making it and he makes them a lot, it's a margarita. If he's getting it from Domino's, it's tuna sweet corn.
Tuna sweet corn.
So I'll give you that as a win. What's your answer?
Oh, for me it's classic sort of pepperoni. If you want a pizza, you want that pizza. To me, I've no truck with fancy. I'll stretch to a hot honey and chorizo sort of thing, variations on that, but
That's still
absolute classic.
just tarty pepperoni, isn't it? Really.
Tarty pepperoni. Yeah.
Favourite movie?
Andy's favourite movie. Oh God! All right, it'll be a classic 60s or 70s sort of like action thriller, something like Get Carter or The Italian Job. Or one of those
less thriller, but right decades.
It'll have Gene Hackman or Michael Caine in it. It'd probably considered a horror, but I don't think it'd have gone for a horror as a favourite movie. Or maybe it's... Oh, Don't Look Now, is it? I don't know. I don't know.
It was Jaws.
Jaws! Yeah, brilliant, of course. Yeah.
And your response, sir?
Oh, my favourite movie... if I'm allowed a trilogy, I really like the Before Sunset, Before Sunrise, Before Midnight trilogy by Richard Linklater. I love those. Single movies, maybe Wings of Desire by Wim Wenders, or maybe Magnolia, the P.T. Anderson film. I'll go with those.
Thank you.
I love it.
Favourite person or people who make music? I warn you, Nyman struggled with this.
Yeah, I struggle with that one because he's phenomenal at coming up with pretty much all the music in the shows comes from Andy with some weird thing on his phone he's got going, what about this? And it's perfect. He's extraordinary with music, and they're all people you've just never heard of that are
awesome, just
brilliant.
Everyone needs a friend like that.
Yeah, I don't know. He might have said Charlie O'Connor to be kind, who's Andrew O'Connor's son, who did phenomenal music for Unbelievable. But I don't know. I think it would be some kind of funky... Oh, no. Anthony Newley. Maybe he'd have said Anthony Newley.
He said the Preservation Hall Jazz Band.
Yes. Yeah,
which I had not heard of, but then went and listened to afterwards. And jolly good.
Now he said that, absolutely, yeah. I've heard him say that before.
Are you in a position to answer that question? Favourite person or people who make music?
I'm a huge fan of Rufus Wainwright, and when I paint, which I'm doing a lot at the moment, I listen to him. Leonard Cohen, maybe, I'd probably say. And also there is a classical pianist called Vikingur Olafsson, which I'm sure I'm saying wrong, who I'm very heavily into at the moment as well, but not when I'm painting. So if I'm writing or doing something else, it's Vikingur Olafsson. If I'm painting, it's probably Leonard Cohen or Rufus Wainwright.
And finally, who would you rather fight? One massive Andy Gladwin or 100 tiny Joshua Jays?
I'd rather fight 100 tiny Joshua Jays.
Okay.
Because then I could punch him really hard in the nose, and he'd have to have it replaced again.
Okay. And what do you think Mr. Nyman chose?
He would fight a massive Andy Glavin because that prize fighting thing is not about to fight a tiny boy.
Unhesitatingly, without a second's pause, he agreed with you, and 100 Shiny Joshuas would be more fun to
Oh, did he? I'm surprised.
squash.
I'm surprised.
Yeah,
Okay.
he took the easy route. Derren Brown, thank you so much for giving us so much of your time. It's been an absolute delight, and your new tome is available at VanishingInkMagic.com. When does the tour start? When have you got to write this stuff by?
Oh God, I think it starts the beginning of March. I'm really trying not to think about it.
That doesn't seem awfully far away.
No. Sorry, I can't hear you. Start of March, and it stretches through till September. I can't wait. It's the best, wonderful, most wonderful thing. And I've taken a year off from all of that stuff, so I'm really looking forward to it. But yeah.
And should people want to buy tickets, where should they go?
I've literally no idea, but I imagine if you go to derrenbrown.co.uk, there'd be some link there because it would be serious.
It would be a miss.
It would be a miss if there wasn't something on my website.
You'd have to talk to the people that do the things.
I'm serious. Stiff words.
Derren Brown, thank you very much indeed. Enjoy your dinner.
I will. Thank you so much. Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you.